Okay, welcome to the fifth shiur, probably the last one. Maybe we'll do a sixth. We'll see. But this is another shiur on reincarnation, and the overall Hakdama we've done many times, but we'll just say it one more time. That why we're giving a shiur on the concept of Gilgulim, which is reincarnation, is because it helps us understand that the life that we're living is really a small piece of a much bigger story. And not just in our personal lives, but when you learn through the Arizal and the Ramami Pano and the Sfarim that discuss Gilgulim, which again, almost everything I'm saying is coming from this sefer over here, which is called Otzer Hal Gilgulim, which is someone who literally gathered pretty much all of the sources you could find on Gilgulim and codified it by topic, so it's like a little encyclopedia on Gilgulim and reincarnation. So you put it together, and when you read through these Gilgulim and through these stories, you understand that all of the Torah, and really specifically Tanach, where we go through the biblical stories that took place, are all rehashing of the same story happening over and over again until we get it right. So very often different souls will make mistakes in one incarnation, and then they'll come into the world over and over and over, and they'll replay. And when you see what happens in Tanach, the interplay between neshamas that have been here before, and how some of the stories that play out are not only repeats, but they're the correct version where the tables have turned, like we saw with Cain and Hevel. You'll hopefully project that into your own life, that you won't ever really figure out exactly who you're a Gilgul of. Won't really know that. But you'll know that the people that are around you that you interact with, either the people who you're friends with, who your enemies are, all of that is certainly part of this story of Gilgul, of reincarnation. And it helps you appreciate that even if things don't go your way, Hashem is always working things out. In fact, this week's parsha, Mishpatim, the Zohar says, Da Sod de Gilgula, that Parshas Mishpatim is the secret of Gilgul. So I think we mentioned it before, Parshas Mishpatim is very much not a parsha you think is the secret of Gilgul. A Gilgul parsha you think is something spooky, deep, different events taking place. It's really just a bunch of monetary laws. So why is the parsha of monetary law, why is that the secret of Gilgul, deep secret of Gilgul that the Zohar says that's where you'll find Gilgul? So we mentioned previously that the whole corpus of Jewish halacha, monetary halacha in particular, ensures that souls that come into the world will ultimately either return money that they once took illegally, or they're going to receive money that was due to them, that was taken from them in a previous incarnation, in a previous lifetime. So therefore, when one follows the halachos of the Torah, especially in Dina Mamanos, in monetary law, it's guaranteeing that the Gilgulim, that the reincarnations that took place in the world, will work themselves out. And that's actually what the Baal Shem Tov says. That the Baal Shem Tov says, why is it so Gilgul? Because when you go into court and you end up losing a court case because al pi halacha, according to the Jewish law, you can't extract money from that person, even though you know 100% that you're in the right and he's in the wrong, and he stole from you or he damaged you, and you should be getting that money that you're trying to get from him. So the Baal Shem Tov says that's why it's so Gilgula. Recognize that the reason Hashem is not letting you take that money is because in a previous Gilgul you owed him money, and therefore you're not allowed to take back that money from him because it belongs to him. And Hashem will sometimes make a person pay money in a Beis Din, even though he thinks that he shouldn't have paid that money. And in a secular court, he would never have had to pay that money, because Hashem's ensuring that the money gets back to its rightful owner from a previous life. So that's this concept of a Gilgul. So tonight we're going to delve into Tanach and see another story of Gilgul like we did with Cain and Hevel. And we saw that played out through the generations within different biblical narratives. We're going to see the same exact thing will take place with two other biblical characters, and you'll see that a lot of the difficult relationships and events that take place in Tanakh that you can't really explain, and that kind of leave you wanting when you read through the stories themselves, and when you read through the Mefarshim, you kind of walk away saying, like, what happened? Why did that happen? I don't really understand that story. Why was it relevant? What took place? So you kind of have a deeper appreciation when you see Gilgul. So first, let's just ask some questions that hopefully we'll answer with this concept of Gilgul. Number one, everybody's always bothered when they read through the Parshas and Bereshis, why did Asav why was he able to trick Yitzhak? And why did Yitzhak love Asav so much? And you see throughout the story, in fact, Yitzhak was blinded because Asav's wives were doing Avodah Zarah idolatry in the home, and it was filled with this incense. He knew that Asav was a rasha. You have to assume. There's no way that Asav could have tricked Yitzchak into believing that he was really a tzaddik. So why did Yitzchak love Asav? And why did he never rebuke him? Meaning, to the end of Asav's life, Asav never did tshuva. He never did tshuva his whole life. And yet we never see that Yitzchak ever tried to stop him from being wicked or tried to rebuke him or punish him. It seems like he loved him to the very end. So perhaps that was a mistake. Maybe he was hoping that Asav would do tshuva, but in the end, Yitzchak was clearly mistaken. And Hashem organized things that Yaakov would get the birthright, and Yitzchak remained the rasha his whole life. So why did Yitzchak never rebuke Asav? And was that a problem? Was that a mistake that he never ended up taking care of that by the end of Asav's life? Number two, there's a very interesting story in Tanach, also in Bereshis, where Dina is raped by Shechem. She's taken by Shechem. And Rashi says something shocking based on a medrash. Why was Dina taken by Shechem? Why would that have happened to the daughter of a tzaddik like Yaakov Avinu? How could that have happened? It was such a tragedy. So the medrash says because when Yaakov was meeting Asav, so he put Dina in a box. He hid her in a box because he was afraid that Asav would see Dina's beauty and want to marry her, and he didn't want Dina to end up marrying his brother Asav. And the medrash says Dina could have been machzir Asav l'tshuva. She was such a special person, such a special neshama, that she could have caused Asav to do tshuva. And therefore, since Yaakov had withheld his daughter from his brother and didn't have mercy on his brother and feel that maybe Dina could change him, so then Dina was now taken by a non-Jew and she was raped. So crazy story, right? Wild. Yaakov should have known that. His brother was a rasha. Well, you don't give your daughter to your brother who you know is wicked. So why was he held accountable for that? And would he have done tshuva if he had married Dina? Okay, but you see that in some way Asav was destined for Dina, and it's interesting their names go together. Dina. Well, he's destined for Leah, and then subsequently Dina. And Asav we know is the Midah of Din, and her name was Dina, right? Din, and the female of Din. So they very much had some sort of chemistry there with this Midah of Din, that she could have saved his soul and she didn't. But they have some sort of connection between the two of them. So what was the connection, and did they ever actually rectify that connection? Okay, next is a very interesting Gemara that lists the 6 ways in which Rabbi Akiva became wealthy. And one of the ways he became wealthy was, it says that he married the wife Aishas Tornesrophus Harasha. There was a Roman general, something, I think it was a general, his name was Tornesrophus, and Rabbi Akiva would always debate him. There's lots of stories in the Gemara where they debate each other. And eventually it says that Rabbi Akiva married his wife. So the Gemara doesn't even explain the story. Doesn't even say the story. So we'll say the story a little bit later on. But why did Rabbi Akiva end up having to marry this non-Jewish woman? Well, she converted, but it's very interesting that he would have to marry her. Next, what happened to Rabbi Akiva's body after he died? I don't know if anyone knows the end of the story. Most people know Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death by the Romans, and Yatsa Nishmasu Ba'achas, he said Shema at the very end of his life, but then we don't know what happened after that. We know he's buried in Tveria. You can go visit his grave. How did he get there? Did anything happen after that? So we'll discuss that. And another question, why didn't Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students respect one another? They all died in a plague. They didn't give kavod to one another. What was so hard about giving kavod to each other? And furthermore, after the first 10,000 died, didn't any of them realize that what was happening and maybe make a tikkun, rectify the situation, and maybe give kavod to the other? How did they all go down not giving kavod to one another? I mean, even the last person, right? He was seemingly willing to lose his life as opposed to giving kavod to his fellow Talmud. So it's a very interesting story that all 24,000 died. It's tragic, but 24,000. So we'll have to see where else did we see the number 24,000 in Tanach. And finally, the last one is, what was the sin of Nadav and Avihu? See how these are all like disconnected stories? We'll see. I'm working backwards. then we'll connect them all together. But what was the sin of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron HaKohen? We know that they brought a korban into the Kodesh HaKadoshim without permission. Rashi implies that they drank wine before they went in, and they were both burned up and they both died. So what was their sin? And when, if ever, was it rectified, this mistake? These were huge tzaddikim. In fact, when they died, Moshe Rabbeinu said to Aaron that they were even greater than he and Aaron. So they were the greatest human beings alive in the greatest generation that ever lived. So these were unbelievable tzaddikim that both were taken from this world because of some sort of infraction. So what was their sin? Okay, so first we'll see where we're going with the story. So all of the answers to all these questions are found in Parshas Pinchas, in Sefer HaGilgulim. Between Sefer HaGilgulim of the Arizal and the Rama Mipano, so they discuss how all of these stories are intertwined. And it's really going to boil down to the story in Parshas Pinchas, which is a story with Zimri and Cosby. So let's just rehash the story, and then we'll try to plug it into who these neshamas were and what was really taking place behind the scenes. So Zimri and Cosby were two individuals that were ultimately killed by Pinchas. Zimri was a prince of the Shevet of Shimon, and Cosby was a princess of Midian. She was a princess in Midian, and she was not Jewish. So Zimri, this Jewish prince, takes this non-Jewish princess, and he goes in front of Moshe Rabbeinu and says, is she mutter or not? And he says, Asur, she's not Jewish, you can't have her. So he says, but you married Tzipora, she was not Jewish, and he takes her against her will, says by her belorit, by her ponytail, and then he sins with her in front of the entire Jewish people, and the tribe of Shimon seemingly support their leader. Pinchas sees what's happening, and he goes over to Moshe. What's Moshe doing? He's there with the elders by the tent, by the Ohel Moed, where the Shechina is, and they're crying. Moshe and the elders are crying. So why are they crying? Because Moshe forgot the halacha, and he didn't know what to do in this situation. There's a terrible thing happening in public, desecration of Hashem's name, a prince of Klal Yisrael with a non-Jew in public, and the whole tribe of Shimon seems to be supporting what's taking place. And Moshe Rabbeinu is crying, he forgot the halacha. So Pinchas comes up to Moshe, says, Moshe, the halacha is kanaim pogin bo, that a kanai, a zealot, who feels that this chil Hashem is a terrible disgrace to the honor of Hashem, he feels that anger within him that's really based on a deep love of Hashem, so he feels a jealousy for Hashem, kina, and kanaim pogin bo, that if someone feels that zealousness, so they're actually supposed to be the ones that go and kill the person. You're allowed to kill him right there without due process, right? Without taking him to a court, without edim. If you feel that kina, that true righteous zealotry, so you're allowed to actually go kill the person. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you're the one that remembered the halacha, so then you should carry out the act. So Pinchas takes ramach beyado, he takes a spear in his hand, and while they're in the middle of the act, he spears them, and he kills both of them, and he impales them on the spear, and he carries them out on the spear in front of all of Klal Yisrael. And there was 10 miracles that took place, the Gemara says, when he actually speared them, and he carries them out, and all of Klal Yisrael see what's taking place, and they realize the terrible thing that had just happened, and suddenly a plague breaks out among the tribe of Shimon, and people are dying, and Aaron HaKohen eventually brings incense, and he stops the plague, and 24,000 Jews from the tribe of Shimon die. Pinchas is rewarded with a bris shalom, with a covenant of peace, and he becomes a Kohen. Even though he was a grandson of Aaron, but he was not a Kohen because he had already been born before the sons of Aaron were appointed to the priesthood, to the kahuna, and only sons born after that would continue with the line of priesthood of kahuna. But anyone born before that would not. So he was not going to be a Kohen, but because of this act, he was zoche to elevate and to become a Kohen. Okay, so that was the story. So the Arizal says that Pinchas was actually a Gilgul of Yitzhak, and that Zimri was a Gilgul of Asav. So you have Yitzhak and Asav. And he says, and the Arizal writes, that what happened? That Yitzhak represents the Midah of Din, of justice. And there was a terrible injustice that took place during his lifetime. What I mentioned before, that he actually loved and supported his son Asav, who was a wicked Rasha. Not only was he a wicked Rasha, he was chayav, Rashi says he was chayav of avodah zarah, shvichas damim, gilei rayos, all the cardinal sins. He was chayav misa, he should have been put to death. And Yitzhak obviously had hoped that Asav would come around. And in fact, the Parsha says that he loved him ki tzayid bepiv, So the simple meaning, Rashi says, one of the interpretations is because he trapped game for his mouth that Asav would hunt and feed Yitzchak the food, and that's why Asav loved him. So another parish is that Tzad B'piv, he tricked him with his mouth. He trapped Yitzchak with his mouth, so that Asav would pretend to be righteous, and Yitzchak was tricked by that, which is also interesting that Asav never figured it out, even though his wife clearly probably told him that Asav was a Rasha. Rivka knew, and nevertheless he never called him out on it. But the Arizal says Ki Tzad B'piv, because he had something trapped in his mouth. He had a spark of kedusha that was trapped in his mouth. This is what the Arizal says, and he saw that there was a spark of potential within him, a very, very, very holy spark, tremendously holy spark. That Asav could have been one of the avos. The Midrash says that Asav was supposed to be one of the avos. There was supposed to be 4 avos. Asav would marry Leah, and Yaakov would marry Rachel. That's the way it was supposed to play out. But instead, Yaakov took both portions, and he ended up marrying both sisters. But Asav had tremendous, tremendous potential. But Yitzhak totally misplayed it. And at the end of the day, there was a terrible injustice in the world. That once Yitzhak died and Asav left the world, everyone said, how could this big tzaddik Yitzhak have had such a wicked son? Not only a wicked son, but he loved him to the very end. Terrible injustice. Imagine you saw a huge tzaddik. Imagine the Gadol Hador. You have to picture what it looked like, right? You have the Gadol Hador, huge rabbi, and his son is not only not religious, he's wicked, murderer. A known murderer, one of the most famous murderers in the world, right? Asav was a bandit. Everyone knew he was a murderer. He was a tremendous warrior. And this Gadol Hador supports his son, who's a murderer. Can you imagine that? Shocking. So there was a terrible injustice that took place in the world. And Yitzchak's whole midah is din. His midah is justice. So it was like a double whammy. It's terrible what took place in the world. Big Chil Hashem. So Asav was brought back into the world as Zimri. And he was given another chance. And what did he do? So obviously he failed. He failed once again. He sinned. So Yitzchak was reincarnated into the body of Pinchas, says the Arizal, and he took revenge, so to speak. He finally enacted justice upon his son, and that's why he killed Zimri. So that's one story that was playing out. You'll see how many stories it was. You could see from the drama of that event when Pinchas went and impaled 2 people, a prince of the Jewish people and a non-Jewish princess. It was an unbelievable event that took place in Klal Yisrael. So when you see an event like that, now you see behind the scenes how many deep tikkunim and rectifications were taking place. So the first one was Yitzhak and was finally rectifying his relationship with Asav and taking out the justice that was meant to be taken out, and then there would be justice in the world, that Asav would finally be punished for his wicked deed. So that's one tikkun that took place. Tikkun number 2 is the Arizal writes that when Pinchas was about to impale Zimri and Cosby, the neshamas of Nadav and Avihu were misaber, impregnated Pinchas. So ibur neshama is another concept you find within Gilgulim and within the writings of the Arizal, that sometimes a living person can actually have the neshama of a tzaddik enter into his body to help him and give him strength to carry out a specific mitzvah, or because he was zoche to that, he merited it because he had done some tremendously righteous act that tzaddik usually was connected to or known for, so that he is zoche, he merits having that neshama in his body. So when Pinchas was about to carry out this righteous zealotry, so he had the neshamas of Nadav and Avihu enter into his body. So what did they have to do with any of this? So the Talei Chaim explains that Nadav and Avihu's sin was that they had a tremendous yearning and a burning fire of love for Hashem. And they wanted to express that. And they wanted to express it in the most intimate way. To go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holiest place on earth, and bring the holiest korban. Right? They wanted to bring the Ketores, the incense korban. And the problem was that they were not commanded to do so. Now, when you're not commanded to do something, there's a big issue there. Is that if you're going into a tremendously holy place, and there's no command for you to be there, so then the Kedusha in that place, the holiness of that place is so intense, and there's no mitzvah. A mitzvah is like a vessel, it's like a kli that can contain that holiness, that Hashem gives you an action, He gives you a command, and then it creates a vessel. And if you build that vessel with your mitzvah, so then the Kedusha has a place to sit. But if you don't build the vessel, if you don't have a mitzvah, and you go and try to enter into a place of tremendous Kedusha without the command, so then you bring down that Kedusha, but it's like a fire, which it was. It was a fire, but there's nothing to contain it. So it's very, very dangerous. So it can burn you, and that's what it did. It actually killed Nadav and Avihu. They felt such a deep love of Hashem. It's called an isarusa dilatata in Chassidus. It's called an arousal from below. An arousal from above is called isarusa de la'ela. Sometimes Hashem feels a love for the Jewish people, and they get an automatic gift that they suddenly just feel a love of Hashem. Sometimes a person down here, because of circumstances, he feels a burning desire to get close to Hashem. That is called an isarusa de latata, an arousal from below. We feel that love of Hashem. So they felt an isarusa de latata, an arousal from below, but there was no corresponding arousal from above to give them the mitzvah. So therefore, they acted in the wrong way. One of the praises it says about Aaron HaKohen very often in the Torah is Aaron didn't lo shines abodaso. He didn't change from the command that Hashem gave him. He did exactly what Hashem told him to do, which means that's not a big praise if you don't have any other havamina, any other thought to do anything different. Right? If someone just is a robot, so it's not a big praise, and he followed the instructions to a T. It's telling you that because obviously he had a lot more that he wanted to do. Right? Even Aaron HaKohen was filled with such a love for Hashem. He had such a love, he wanted to do so much more, but he held himself back. He restrained himself because he didn't have the commands from Hashem. He couldn't just run into the Kodesh HaKodashim whenever he wanted, but his sons did, and therefore they were taken from this world. Pinchas was a rectification of that act because he felt a deep desire and love to connect to Hashem. He felt that burning love that resulted in a kinna, in a jealousy, in wanting to take vengeance for the chil Hashem that he was seeing in front of him. But there was one halacha in the world that says that you create the mitzvah when you feel that feeling. It's Kanayim Poginbo. There's the Kanayim, the zealot Poginbo. They're the ones who take out the justice, who kill the person that's desecrating Hashem's name. So he felt that same love that Nadav and Avihu felt, but now it was channeled into a mitzvah, which was to take the vengeance of Hashem out in the world. And that mitzvah was activated by the Isarusa de Latata, by the arousal from below, by that love. Actually, the halacha is that if someone doesn't feel the kanos, doesn't feel the righteous zealotry in that moment of seeing that chil Hashem, he's not allowed to kill the guy. It's kanayim pogembo. You have to be a very holy, righteous zealot, and you feel that burning love for Hashem, and therefore you can't stand to watch the desecration. And then out of pure raw emotion, you are that's the activator of the mitzvah, and then you go and kill the person. So he literally felt that love, but now it was channeled into a mitzvah. So Nadav and Avihu grabbed on at that moment. They came into his body, and now their souls were rectified as well, because now they were able to channel that feeling, that righteous feeling of love for Hashem, into a mitzvah through that act of zealotry. So he was able to be mitaka in their souls as well. Okay, so that's the next tikkun that took place. Okay.
So Eliyahu and Avi also had some rectification.
Yeah, we're going to get to Eliyahu and Avi for sure. Don't worry. Yeah, of course. Pinchas is Eliyahu. So we'll have to see how that played out. Okay, next. The Maggid of Koznitz actually says that who else was Zimri a Gilgulim? Again, we said earlier that a lot of times these neshamas are not exclusive, as we see here. There were a lot of neshamas that were being rectified during this very traumatic event, but it was a very important event. So he says, the Maggid Koznitz, that Zimri was actually Shechem, and Cosby was Dina. So what happened? So he writes that when Shechem went up to Shamayim, went up to the next world, after having forced himself upon Dina, so we know what was the rest of the story. So he forced himself upon Dina. He went to Yaakov and the brothers and said, I want to marry your daughter. And they said, well, we can't marry her off to someone who's not circumcised, so you all have to get circumcisions. So Shechem and his father Hamor said, okay, we'll do it. So they went to the whole city. They got all the men to circumcise themselves. On the third day, Shimon and Levi came in and slaughtered the entire city, including Shechem, including Hamor, and all of the men of the city. So then, the Maggid Koznitz says, when Shechem went up to the higher world, he said, it's not fair. I would have done tshuva, I would have been a good person if I had only been born to a Jewish mother, if I'd been born a Jew. But since my father was Hamor means donkey, but it also means chomer, means physicality. I was born with a deep-seated physicality, so that caused me to sin. And that's why I sinned. But if I only had another chance as a Jew, my neshama would be rectified. So Hashem said, you know what? I'll give you another chance. You'll come into the world as a Jew. Not only a Jew, but the prince of the tribe of Shimon, the very individual who killed him, right? Shimon and Levi killed Shechem, so he came back as Shimon, right? Came back as Shimon, as the prince of the tribe of Shimon. And look what he did, the exact same thing backwards. In the story of Shechem, Shechem was a non-Jew, and he ended up raping a Jew. And this is the exact opposite. Now he came back as a Jew, and he ended up forcing himself upon a non-Jew, the Midianite princess, Cosby. So he failed once again. So he failed again, and he took Dina once again against her will, because that was Dina came back as the non-Jewish princess, took her back against his will. And who killed him? So someone from the tribe of Levi, right? Shimon and Levi are the ones who killed Shechem. So he came back as Shimon, and now Pinchas from the tribe of Levi ended up killing Shechem once again. So they replay. He killed Shechem once again. And not only that, but the Arizal says that how many men were killed in the city of Shechem? So he says those men that circumcised themselves that were killed, he says 24,000. Those were the 24,000 men from the tribe of Shimon that died in the plague after the act of Zimri. So those were also the same souls that were going through this exact experience with their king once again, right? Their king was Shechem. They were the subject of Shechem. Here their prince was Zimri, and the same 24,000 souls now who supported his act. They supported it, right? They supported him taking Cosby to the tent in front of all the Jewish people, so they were punished once again, just like the residents of Shechem. The Mefarshim actually explain why were they killed by Shimon and Levi. It's not fair. Just because the king does something illegal, he rapes a woman, so now you have to kill the whole city. So Mefarshim right, because they did not have a court that was set up to take care of this sinful act. They didn't hold Shechem accountable for what he had done. And therefore, according to the laws of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which says you have to have a court that's established, so they were held guilty because essentially they supported their king in the act that he had done. So the same exact thing happened here. Right? They supported their king, they were killed. Here they supported Zimri, once again, the very same neshama of Shechem, and they were killed. It's also interesting that we said that Zimri was a Gilgul of Asav, right? The very first time we mentioned it, and Pinchas was a Gilgul of Yitzhak. Well, that means that Zimri, who was Asav, was also having a relationship with Cosby, who was Dina. Now we just said that Cosby, the female, was Dina. So you see that Asav actually finally did have that connection that he was supposed to have with Dina, but it clearly didn't work. So now it was proven that Dina would not have machzir him l'tshuva. She didn't make him do tshuva, and therefore they both were killed. So they both were killed. Okay, so that was the next one. Okay.
It's like intermarriage of souls.
Yeah, there's a lot of although you see that when a soul is connected to another soul.
No, I'm talking between Jews and non-Jews.
Yeah, but they're flipping back and forth. But we're gonna see it's gonna get even further. It's gonna go even.
Can I just ask quickly? Do they have to do like they didn't complete their tikkun? I mean, now
we're gonna get to it. Yeah,
so
wait, we're
they're
not
gonna
done.
Reappear again?
We're mid-story. Okay, what's the next Gilgulim that are taking place here? So Pinchas we know is Eliyahu HaNavi. So most Mefarshim explain that he actually was Eliyahu HaNavi, that it was one person that lived for a very, very long time. Eliyahu never died, so Pinchas also never died. Some say he was a Gilgul of Eliyahu was a Gilgul of Pinchas, but most Mefarshim actually learned that Pinchas was Eliyahu HaNavi. So there's a story in Tanach, in Navi, where Eliyahu HaNavi is chased down by a wicked queen of Klal Yisrael, who was married to Achav. And this queen's name was Izebel. I think Isabel, they say in English, but Izebel. So Izebel tried to kill Eliyahu, and Eliyahu ran away. And while he was hiding, so his soul was sustained by ravens. Ravens would come and bring him food. And where did they get the food? From the table of this queen Izebel. They would take it from her house and they would bring it to Eliyahu HaNavi, who was in hiding. So says, and this is from the Ramami Pano, that Izebel was a Gilgul of Cosby, of the woman who was killed by Pinchas. And now she was trying to kill Eliyahu HaNavi, who's Pinchas. So she was trying to take revenge against the person that had once killed her. So Eliyahu HaNavi, he had to run away. And the Rami Pano says the ravens were actually Gilgulim of the souls of the 24,000 that died from the tribe of Shimon. And to prove that Pinchas was correct in killing her and that he was the righteous one, they took food from her table and brought it to sustain Eliyahu HaNavi, who was Pinchas, to show that really Pinchas was the one who was correct and that she was the one who was wrong, and really she had deserved to die in the previous life as Cosby. Okay, so that's another layer to the story. So that's how he's playing down through history. So where's the next time that these neshamas turn up again in history? Because again, none of them, they didn't have the rectification yet. Right now they're staying pretty wicked. Right? Zimri and Cosby did not have a good a good ending so far, right? Izevel, right? Shem. These are pretty wicked souls. So here's when it gets very, very interesting. Says here the Arizal that who was Zimri reincarnated and Cosby reincarnated as? So Zimri was reincarnated as Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the neshama of Zimri. That was Rabbi Akiva. And you'll notice there's one thing that you should have already connected in your head when, and you should have connected it to Rabbi Akiva. What was it? 24,000. Yeah, 24,000 that died by Shechem were the same 24,000 that died in Shevet Shimon were the same 24,000 Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Isn't that crazy? Those neshamas actually came back as Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. And says the Arizal, that's why they were lo nagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They didn't respect one another because they knew these were Tanaim. You have to understand these were huge neshamas that knew the secrets of Kabbalah. They knew the previous Gilgulim that they had been. If the Arizal knew previous Gilgulim, then you could imagine the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva certainly knew the secrets of Gilgulim. They knew that their souls were actually from the Shevet of Shimon, and they had done those sins in the past life, that they had supported that terrible act, and therefore they couldn't give respect to one another. That's why they went down to the very last man. Right? They died because of it, because no matter how hard they tried, when they looked at that neshama, they saw the sin that they themselves had been a part of, and they couldn't respect one another because of the terrible sins that they had committed. So all 24,000 died as a tikkun, as a rectification. They went through that death, and that was actually the rectification of those souls, because they lived righteous lives as the students of Rabbi Akiva, and then they died one more death because they couldn't give kavod to each other because of who the souls had been, and that was the rectification. So who was Rabbi Akiva married to? So most people are familiar that he was married to Bas Kalva Bas Ben Savua, Bas Kalva Savua, the daughter of Kalva Savua. Kalva Savua was a wealthy Jew, and eventually his daughter Rachel married Rabbi Akiva. But there was another person Rabbi Akiva was married to. Unclear if he had two wives or if it was at different times. But the Gemara says that there were 6 things that made Rabbi Akiva very wealthy. And one of those 6 things, it says, like I mentioned earlier, Ashes Turnus Rufus, the wife of Turnus Rufus, who was a Rasha, who was a wicked Roman general. So the Gemara doesn't say how or what the relationship was. So the Ran actually explains what took place. So Rabbi Akiva would always debate this Turnus Rufus in front of the emperor, the Caesar. And the Caesar and Rabbi Akiva always won the debates. One after another, he always won. So Turnus Rufus, Rasha, came home very upset one day, and he was complaining to his wife that this Rabbi Akiva makes him look like a fool in front of the emperor. So she said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. She said, Rabbi Akiva is only protected because he's righteous. I'll dress up and I'll seduce him. And then, because I'll seduce him, so then he'll have sinned, and then Hashem will not protect him anymore, and then you'll be able to defeat him. So she was very, very beautiful, the Ran says, and she dressed up, and Turnus Rufus gave her permission, and she went to seduce Rabbi Akiva. So when she walked up to Rabbi Akiva spit, then he cried, and then he laughed. So that's a pretty strange response when a beautiful woman walks up to you. So she said, why did you do that? So he said, I can only tell you 2 of them. I'll tell you the first 2. I spit because when I saw your beauty, I know that it began from a putrid drop. That you just began from a putrid place, and therefore I spit because I was disgusted when I thought of that. And I cried because I saw that this tremendous beauty would ultimately rot in the ground. So I cried. And it didn't say why he laughed. So the Ran says, why did he laugh? Because he saw with prophetic insight that he would end up marrying her. So she realized at that moment that she had been found out, that he basically knew that she was there to seduce him. So she said, how can I do tshuva? So he said, go and do tshuva. He says, go and do tshuva. So it says that she went and she did tshuva, and she converted to Judaism, and she ended up marrying Rabbi Akiva. And she took all the wealth of her husband, who evidently died, I guess, and she brought that to Rabbi Akiva into the marriage, and that's one of the 6 things that made Rabbi Akiva tremendously wealthy, the Gemara says in the Dharam. So who was she? She was a Gilgul of Cosby, says the Ramami Pano. She was the Tikkun of Cosby because she was a non-Jew that converted and became Jewish and ended up finally getting to marry her long-lost love, Zimri, who finally also had gotten things right and had lived the life as the righteous Rabbi Akiva. So now listen to the end of the story. So right, that was the tikkun. So now they have a tikkun. They're both righteous, and they died very righteous deaths. So we know Rabbi Akiva, he died being tortured by the Romans with the word echad on his lips after saying Shema. So it doesn't say what happened after that. So the Yalkut Shimoni says what happened after that. So I actually have it here. So it's fascinating, Yalkut Shimoni. It says, Ma'isa hayeh Rabbi Akiva, shaya chavush b'beis ha'asurim. So Rabbi Akiva was trapped in prison. Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi, hayat Hamido Meshamsho. Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi was his student and his servant. Erev Yom Kippurim niftar mimenu v'halach lebeso. So Erev Yom Kippur, he left Rabbi Akiva in prison and he went home. Ba Eliyahu zal v'amar al Pesach beiso amar lei shalom alecha Rebbe amar lei shalom alecha Rebbe Moiri amar lei klum atat tzarich amar lo umi ata amar lei Kohen ani ubati lahakid lecha Rabbi Akiva meis bebeis asurim. So he said, "Who are you?" Right? Rabbi Yeshua said to this person, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm a Kohen." It was Eliyahu and Navi, and he said, "I've come to tell you that your Rebbe Rabbi Akiva has died in prison. They tortured him to death." Miyad halchu shneim lebeis asurim. So immediately they both went to the prison where Rabbi Akiva's body was held. Umatzu pesach sha'ar beis asurim pasuach, and they saw that the door to the prison was open, conveniently. V'sar beis asor harayashin, and the guard was sleeping. V'chol ha'asurim hayu yeshenim v'hishkivu es Rabbi Akiva al hamita v'yatzu, and everyone in the prison was sleeping. Hashem had set things up perfectly that they could take Rabbi Akiva's body. And they put Rabbi Akiva's body on the bier and they left the prison. Miyad nitbal Eliyahu zal v'natlu al ktefav. Immediately, Eliyahu Navi took the bed and he put it onto his shoulders. Ukishra Rabbi Yeshua kach amar lei Eliyahu zal. Rebbe v'halo emesh amarti li shekohen hayisa. Rebbe, didn't you tell me yesterday that you're a Kohen? How are you carrying a dead body? A Kohen is not allowed to carry a dead body. The Kohen asur l'tameh b'meis. A Kohen is not allowed to become tameh from a dead body. Amarlo dayecha Rabbi Yeshua b'ni chas v'shalom she'ein tuma b'tamidei chachamim v'af v'tamideyim. Chas v'shalom, that you think that the body of a dead Talmid Chacham is metameh. There's no tuma by a Talmid Chacham. And in fact, this medrash is brought in halachic discussions, although we don't paskin like it, whether Kohanim can visit Kivrei Tzadikim. This is a source that they bring, that Eliyahu Navi, who was a Kohen, said that the body of Rabbi Akiva was not metameh. It didn't impurify. So some bring that as a source. But nevertheless, you see that Eliyahu Navi was the one who personally carried the body of Rabbi Akiva. And they carried his body all night until they got to this place called Antipras. When they went to this place, so they went in some sort of cave, and they went up 3 levels and down 3 levels. And suddenly a cave opened in front of them. And they saw in this cave was a chair, a small bench, a table, and a candelabra. And they put Rabbi Akiva down on the bed that was in this room, and they walked out. And as they were walking out, they saw that the light on the candelabra suddenly lit by itself, and then the door closed. And when Eliyahu Navi saw this, Pasach v'amar, he said, Ashreichem tzadikim v'ashreichem amalei Torah. Praiseworthy and happy are the tzadikim and those who toil in Torah, v'ashreichem yirei Elokim, and happy are the ones who fear God. Sheganuz v'tamun lachem, that there is something hidden and stored away for you. Umeshumar lachem, makom began Eden lasi lavo, and a special place in Gan Eden is there for you in the future. Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva, happy is Rabbi Akiva, shenimtza lecha malon arev b'shas mitascha, that there is a sweet place for you to dwell at the moment of your death. So you see, who was the one that buried Rabbi Akiva? And most people don't know this. Eliyahu Navi. Who was Eliyahu Navi? Pinchas. So the whole thing comes full circle. Pinchas, the very person who had killed Zimri for sinning with Cosby, is now the one who is again bimetame himself. There's a whole discussion. How did Pinchas become tameh when he killed Zimri and Cosby? If he had received the bracha of kahuna, so was he allowed to do that? So you see the exact things happening over again. And one of the miracles that occurred, that is said to have occurred by Zimri and Cosby, was when he impaled them. They didn't die while as long as they were in his hands on the spear, because he didn't want to become tameh because of that. So there he was not allowed to be matameh himself. And here you see he is willing to carry the dead body, but now the body's been rectified, and it's Rabbi Akiva, Zimri is now Rabbi Akiva, and now there's no more tumah, there's no more impurity, because he's reached such a high level of purity that he's now reached a level where even in death he's purified. And Pinchas, Eliyahu and Asav, is the very person who buries him and who lays him to his final resting place. So this whole tikkun comes full circle. So you see how many stories, right? How many biblical stories and how many souls are involved in these acts. And this is just one, any tremendously meaningful biblical narrative that you see, especially the ones that are hard to understand and they're very dramatic. So there's tremendous tikkunim that are taking place there. Hashem is running the world. If something like that would take place in Klal Yisrael, there's obviously a lot of things happening. So you see how much is taking place. So we can just take this as a glimmer, a glimpse, kind of peeking through the cracks as to one story where you see how many Gilgulim and how many lives and souls are being rectified through one act that takes place. So now you have to project that onto your own life. This isn't only by biblical narratives, right? Every neshama that comes into the world, especially in these generations, we're all Gilgulim. We're all reincarnations, and we've all been here before, and we've all interacted, most likely, with all the neshamas that have been here before. So you can rest assured that if you end up moving to a certain city and live in a certain community and daven in a certain shul, that all of those neshamas were probably connected in a previous life. There was nothing random. All the neshamas are here to rectify themselves. So whatever relationships needed to be patched up from previous lives, you can assume that they're taking place here. You see that all these marriages that we just went through, whether it's Rabbi Akiva and Eshes Tornastrofos, whether it's Zimri and Cosby, Asav and Dina, Shechem and Dina, all these relationships, they're all the same neshama, the same male and female that are coming into the world, sometimes as a Jew, sometimes as a non-Jew. So you can imagine that every marriage that takes place is always rectifying previous marriages, right? All these neshamas are intertwined and interconnected. So that kind of gives you a little understanding that of you appreciate the people you're around, and you rectify that the people you either have arguments with or that you become friends with, and then you have to make up with, and you have to patch things up with, and if they stole from you, now you have to make sure you get it back from base. And all of the interactions you're having, the interpersonal relationships, are all part of this tikkun, part of this big rectification that's taking place. And when you get to the next world, so then you get to kind of pan out, like we said, and you get to see the whole movie instead of just a little clip that you're a part of. And you'll appreciate that all of the good times and the bad times in your life were really all part of the rectification, and you wouldn't have had it any other way. And you would never say, oh, I wish I never met that person, right? He was terrible. No, you're going to say, Baruch Hashem that I met that person and that he was terrible, because that was the tikkun that I needed, and it was the tikkun that he needed. And as long as you act according to halacha, and your goal is to become a better person and to do what's your part in life according to the Torah, so then you're guaranteed that the tikkun will work out. Whether the life looks good or not, that's irrelevant. It doesn't have to look pretty, but it's going to work out if you live according to the Torah, because then you're following the storyline, you're following the plot line. The minute that we veer away from the Torah in our interpersonal relationships, and we don't practice bein adam lechavero, we don't respect people's money, we whatever it is, so that's almost a guarantee that we're going to mess things up again, and that we're going to have to come back down again and rectify things all over again.